Hi and welcome to today's live, and I'm talking today about fear. So we were actually scheduled to talk to a friend of mine named Stephanie Pinto today, but we've rescheduled to next week. And if you can tune in next week to that, I highly encourage you to. Stephanie is an emotional intelligence parent coach, and she works with parents in order to assist them to raise emotionally intelligent children. So we'll be talking next week about the effect that our own relationship stuff, like how we interact with our partners and whether there's conflict and how we handle that conflict and resolve that conflict, how that modeling to our children affects them. So how conflict affects our children. So if you do have children, please watch. If you don't have children, then you can watch this as a reflection of how you currently are affected by how your parents showed up in their relationship. So that's really something to step into next week. So today I'm talking about fear. So fear is our danger alert signal. Our reticular activation system is continuously standing, picking up those little micro signals and saying, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And our unconscious mind has one job, and that is to keep us safe. Sometimes fear is a good thing because there is a real danger. We need that fear. It causes us to take action, get ourselves out of a situation that we need to protect ourselves from. That's really good. That's when fear is functioning normally. But sometimes fear can be a hindrance. It can be an irrational fear, or the fear level can be activated when it's not appropriate. And so that then causes us to have obstacles in our life, blocks in our life to taking action. And that can be conscious or unconscious. So sometimes we will not do something and we just don't know why other people can do it. Or on occasion, you might find that these irrational fears make you take the wrong action, make you leave when you should stay, make you stay when you should leave, make you, protect yourself or have a flare up when you should be calm, and the opposite. Just the opposite to what you're doing. So it's like that thing. Sometimes I think to myself, sometimes if I'm having what feels like a powerful response, that most likely I should be doing the opposite. So if I can be aware of that, I will do it. Worry is another form of fear, and that's about the future. And it can be so crippling because this is where the source of anxiety is. Anxiety is about fear of the future. And these things, these worries, are usually not going to happen. Like most of what we worry about never happens. And the feeling that the fact that it destroys our present moment, and just robbing us of all joy, etc., is really, really a reason to not worry. Don't worry, be happy now. And that kind of thing is easy to say and not so easy to do, because fear is a nervous system response. So when we're scared, it affects our performance too. So we become sort of, the stages of competence. It's like unconsciously incompetent, not competent, and then it goes to consciously incompetent, and then it goes to consciously competent, and then it goes to unconsciously competent. So driving a car is an example of where you're unconsciously competent. And I know when my partner sits next to me and starts, oh, you should have changed lanes. Why are we sitting here? Didn't you see that thing? Whatever, where he's being so helpful with my driving. I then move from unconsciously competent to consciously competent. And even that one step down removes a lot of my skills. And so we begin to falter, second guess ourselves, doubt, feel nervous, etc., etc. So when we're scared, our performance actually drops. So you're not going to be able to utilize all that unconscious learning when you're feeling scared. Now, the truth is that fear has a very powerful energy. It can be measured. You can measure emotions with machinery or equipment and get a reading. And that fear that we have within us is a magnet. So the more we become afraid of something, the more we will attract it. And if you believe in the power of attraction or the law of attraction, then you'll already be on board with this. But I've seen this time and time again where you know, people worry about my house is going to be broken in, their house gets broken into, someone else that doesn't even lock their door, like me. For 25 years, I didn't lock my house. It was literally, sometimes I'd go home and the door would still be open on the hinges from where I walked out in the morning, which I've had to adjust that incidentally, because my partner is definitely not one of those people. But when we fear something, it often can be attracted to us. We attract that experience, and I've had so many examples of that in my life. Even and one thing that I find can be really hard to alleviate fears from is around kids, like around my kids. So, you know, if I worry that this will happen, I worry that that will happen, and sure enough, those things tend to manifest, because when you're acting from a place where you don't have faith that something is going to be good, you're going to be acting in that down level. So instead of being unconsciously competent in parenting, you're going to move to a strategy where you're behaving as if the problem already exists. And this happens in not just parenting, but all things. Like if you're worried that you're going to have a car accident, you're going to be driving as if the problem already exists. And I'm not talking about caution. I'm talking about that fear feeling in your body, that actual fear in that charge, that emotional charge. So why do some people have so much fear and other people seem to just blurt through life like, you know, fearless warriors? A lot of it can be from past experience. And this is not just your past experience. It can be your parents' past experience and your grandparents' past experience. And they have done experiments and on mice and rats and so forth, and discovered that when they create a fear in one generation, it actually passes down to the next generation, even though that generation has never been exposed to any of the fear experience. And so even the grandchildren of the rats that were exposed to a particularly awful, scary experience will then, if they're exposed to that trigger, will have that response. So it can either be your past experience or generations before, which makes it a little bit easier to understand why some people have these fears, considering that there's been a lot of people in the past generations that have experienced a lot of fearful stuff. And we have had a lot of change and development, a lot of wars, a lot of different things in that time. There's an emotional charge that exists when we have a past experience, and it lives in our body. Our body is the home of our emotions, and that is why so many somatic therapists are popping out of the woodwork now, recognizing that we need to work with the body when we're working with emotions. Now, if you can imagine somebody that's had developmental trauma, and we wouldn't know, because basically what developmental trauma is that before you have a recollective memory, you've experienced something frightening. And you can imagine that most of us did have frightening experiences when we were small. Even that practice of controlled crying, if you had you know, a childhood where you were a bit insecure and your parent left you to cry yourself to sleep, that could even be a fear that comes up, fear of abandonment. So with past experiences, there's an emotional charge, and essentially we haven't developed any new resources that would make us safe to understand that this is not going to be a problem if it does happen again. So there's some things that we're frightened of where once we get some new resources and new abilities, a new self-belief and self-confidence, and step into our power, then we're able to alleviate those fears. And now one of them would be speaking on lives like this, or doing public speaking, or you know, going to social situations, those kind of things. With new resources, we can allay and alleviate those fears. So when I'm working with myself, which I do work with myself a lot, and I go and see other practitioners for that, because working on yourself is the most important investment you can make, or I'll be working with clients. The thing to do is to discharge that emotional charge from any past events. Now, when I do this, people often say, oh, nothing's ever happened, I don't know where this fear's come from. Now, when I do some of the regression processes, people are surprised to learn that there are things that pop up that they're not aware that are there, where this feeling was there, and it might not even be related. Like you could have, for example, a fear of driving, and it could be related to something completely different. And I've seen this time and time again. And for some reason, your unconscious has said, it was because you were away from home that this happened, so now you won't drive. So it's just stuff like that. So we do processes. There's different processes that I am trained in, and there are many processes that are effective. Some of the processes that I use for working with past events could be, there's some NLP processes, there's some EFT processes, there's TRTP process, there's matrix therapies, there's timeline therapies, depending on what's going on. And even just basic hypnosis is really also very powerful. Number two is I consider to myself, what does this person, or what do I need to think, feel and experience in order to be able to move out of this fear state? So say, for example, many years ago, I was in my early 30s and I had joined the Chamber of Commerce. Now, unbeknown to me, one of my clients was emceeing the local Chamber of Commerce. There was like 80 people in the room at a sit-down dinner, and he said, new member Naomi Stockman, calling you up to the stage, handed me the microphone. I'm on stage standing in front of 80 people without any warning. And I just stood there and pretty much blanked out. I was just stuttering, and it was an absolute feeling of terror washed through my entire body. I could have passed out. Instead, I ran to a lady and just fell into her arms, and then spent the rest of the night just in an absolute panic of shame that I had embarrassed myself and made a fool of myself. So what did I need to think, feel and experience in order to put that behind me, and in order to be able to gain new resources and skills to be able to stand up and speak confidently in front of other people? I needed to know that A, I'm safe, and B, it's over. And I also needed to know that I can speak, and that this is something normal, and then go back and release any moments in the past where I'd felt like an absolute shame, incompetent shame. And I did I'm just popping into my head now actually, that when I was about 6, I was doing ballet, and I was on stage in front of everybody in a hall, and it was my job to go up to the microphone and introduce the next dance that we were about to do in our little blue leotards. And I had the microphone didn't work, and I said something and the microphone worked, and it blurted everything out, and all the adults laughed, and I was really confused because I didn't know why they were laughing. And I also had my mother said I shouldn't have said whatever word it was that I said, which then, like, that's just come up for me now on that public speaking event. So clearing the emotional charge, getting resources that we need. And then what happens is our hippocampus can store these memories as long-term memories. Once something's in long-term memory, it's not going to be activating a current fear. So the problem with memory that isn't stored in long-term memory is your unconscious doesn't realize that it's over and that you're safe. And if it doesn't realize it's over and you're safe, then it's like a current threat, isn't it? Now, example of something where it is actually really traumatic or really distressing or really challenging that we do store in long-term memory is childbirth. So providing you didn't have some, extra complications or extra trauma in the childbirth, the actual childbirth will be stored, you'll go through it, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm never doing that again. It then gets stored in long-term memory. And the next thing you know, you're happily excited to be pregnant again. And you don't spend your 9 months in a state of absolute panic unless you've had something else happen before, until the first contraction when you're like, oh no, I remember this now. I don't want to do this anymore. And by then it's too late and you just go through it again. And as a person who's had 4 children, I can honestly say each time on that first contraction, you're like, this is not what I signed up for, because it really does get wiped out because there's no emotional charge and it's in long-term memory. So what do? We need to acknowledge that a fear exists, acknowledge that it's there, like that I have this fear, or the feeling of fear, even if you don't understand what the fear actually is, whether it's just anxiety. Stop avoiding feeling it and go into that fear. If you can, face it, do some, move towards it, do some research into that thing. So for me, with public speaking, I did then decide I wanted to become a teacher, and I became a TAFE teacher for 7 years. So standing in front of probably not 80 people, but definitely up to 40, and teaching people. So that helped me get over it. Challenge the beliefs and the fears. The fear itself, is it true for everyone, or is it just true for you? So for example, if it's a fear of driving, is it true that everybody is, has this, or is it just you? And if it is just you, then it's likely that you've got some beliefs that are not supporting you, that you've picked up unconsciously from somewhere. And then work out what those beliefs are, because they're most likely lies. If they're not true for everybody, then they're not true for you either, or they're not supportive to you. And remembering that anytime that you're feeling fear, you're going to be operating from that consciously competent place, not your unconsciously competent, which makes you self-conscious. And when you're self-conscious, you are not as capable of being able to do things well, and that then causes problems for you in the way you execute your life and blocks you. So if any of this has made sense, or if you've recognized perhaps that you have some fears that are holding you back in life, look, these things can be so unconscious. I'll tell you a quick story about me with marriage. So Nick and I had been together for 11 years. I had been married previously, and it was kind of like a thing, we just didn't get married until one day a few things shifted and changed, and suddenly we were getting married 8 weeks later, last November 2022. So the 11th of the 11th, 22, I walked down the aisle, got married. Now, since that has happened, so there's been a few things. Since in September, when we decided to get married, I stopped all therapy sessions. I just pulled back. I told myself it was because I was busy, but internally I felt like, something shifted. Got married, went on our honeymoon, got through Christmas, came into January. We're now in February. I've just come up with a pap smear result that is not good, and being referred to a specialist and so forth. Now, I intuitively went to the doctor because I felt that there was something that needed to happen. And I feel after this much work on myself, I can tell you that I am very connected with what's going on with my emotions and my unconscious mind and my body, and that all physical stuff that comes up is somehow linked to this unconscious emotional baggage that we carry. So I'm aware that I have more work to do around whatever it is that's coming up from being in this situation. Now, I did have cancer back in 2002. That was also related to relationship. I had Hodgkin's lymphoma after a massive relationship breakup, which put me into pretty much a nervous breakdown state, cancer, etc., etc. So I know how my body works, and I'm no different to other people. Emotional stress, unconscious running your body, and suddenly you end up with some kind of diagnosis of some kind. So at this moment, I'm going inward, looking inside and doing processes on healing and clearing any emotions, any fears, any blocks, anything on the inside, at the same time as supporting all of you with all the stuff that I have learned and grown through over the last 28 years or so of self-development. So I will keep you posted on that, because I know that I'm going to go inward and clear and heal all this stuff, and I will be able to benefit from that, because every time there's a challenge or a health challenge or an emotional challenge, a relationship challenge, challenges from other people, it's always just an opportunity. and we should welcome those opportunities. It will give us expansion rather than contraction. So if I just went into a like, oh my gosh, physical fear, I'm going to die, blah, 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 that would be counterproductive. Whereas if I go into a state of, here's a challenge that has presented itself for healing. So everything that comes up in our lives is there for the opportunity for us to heal. So if you can sort of get that into your attitude spectrum in your life, you'll find that your life will become so much easier and your growth will be accelerated. You'll be, instead of going into victim mode and like, why me, and why is this happening, and why does everyone else, and so forth, just going into that excitement of looking at how whatever comes up, whether it's criticism, judgment, blame, you know, from other people, or, you know, restrictions, even COVID restrictions, like, how can I grow through this? What's coming up for me that I can work on? Because we are our biggest project of works, our body of works. This is our body of works in this lifetime. Have a beautiful day, and see you next week to talk to Stephanie Pinto about how our relationship conflicts affect our children and how we've been affected by our parents' relationship conflict resolution style. Talk soon.